Danielle Foster was 34 years old when her hands finally stopped shaking long enough to empty her husband's gym bag. Her father had been dead for 11 days. She hadn't been able to say goodbye, hadn't touched the casket, hadn't stood beside her cousins, hadn't delivered the eulogy she'd written on the plane she never boarded. Trevor had sworn the passport just vanished, told her she probably misplaced it herself, the way she misplaced everything when she was stressed. But there it was, zipped in the side pocket he never let her touch, sitting exactly where he'd hidden it 3 nights before her father died. Beneath it, a printed itinerary, a solo flight to Miami, the same weekend. Danielle didn't cry out, didn't call his name. She stood in the laundry room holding the one document that could have let her say goodbye, and understood, with total clarity, that none of it had been an accident. Trevor came home 20 minutes later and asked, with practiced concern, if she'd ever found it. He had no idea she was already looking at him differently, and he had no idea what that difference would cost him. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today, and if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The contract was a beast. 47 pages of renewal terms, 3 rounds of revisions, and one very difficult client who had spent 6 weeks threatening to walk. But at 4:52 on a Tuesday afternoon, Danielle Foster pressed send on the final signed agreement and leaned back in her chair until it creaked. Done. She pressed her lips together to keep from smiling too big. Around her, the open floor of Meridian Logistics hummed with the usual end-of-day noise. Keyboards clicking, a printer grinding away in the corner, someone on the phone near the windows trying to sound calm about a shipment delay. Danielle had already solved 2 of those today before lunch. She picked up her phone and typed fast. Daddy, closed the Hargrove account, 5-year renewal. They weren't going to, and then they did. I'll tell you everything Sunday. Love you. She hit send and watched the little checkmark appear. He'd probably call her in 5 minutes with that low, warm laugh of his, the one that made her feel like she was 10 years old and had just won the science fair. Her father, Charles Odom, didn't give compliments easily, but he gave them fully. Her phone buzzed before she even got her coat off the hook. That's my girl. Call me Sunday. I want every detail. She smiled all the way to the parking garage. The house smelled like garlic and olive oil when she got home. Trevor was in the kitchen, a dish towel slung over one shoulder, a glass of red wine already breathing on the counter. There she is, he said, not looking up from the pan. How'd it go? Hargrove signed. She set her bag on the bench by the door. 5 years. 5 years. He stirred something slowly. Good for you. That was it. Good for you. Not, that's incredible, or, you've been killing yourself over that account for months. Just 2 flat words tossed over his shoulder like a receipt he didn't need. She opened the fridge and poured herself a glass of water. You celebrate with your work friends already? He asked. I came straight home. Huh. He plated the pasta with the focused attention of someone performing a task they wanted credit for. Must be nice, having time to chase promotions while some of us are just trying to hold our numbers. She kept her face even. You closed 3 accounts last quarter. Regional is different. He set the plates on the table. Nobody throws a party for regional. She sat down. She picked up her fork. She did not say what was sitting at the front of her teeth. This was the rhythm of their evenings. Trevor was charming at parties, easy with strangers, the kind of man who remembered everyone's drink order. But inside these walls, where there was no audience, the air between them had a different texture. Not cruel, exactly, just tight, like a shirt that used to fit. She had spent a long time telling herself it was stress, that his job was harder than he let on, that she needed to be more patient, less focused on herself. She was halfway through her pasta when her phone rang. Pat. Danielle's fork stopped. Aunt Pat didn't call on weeknights without a reason. I have to take this, she said, already pushing back from the table. She pressed the phone to her ear. Pat? Baby. Pat's voice was thick, low. It's your daddy. The kitchen shrank. The sound of Trevor's fork against his plate went far away. He collapsed at home this afternoon. The neighbor found him. A pause. He's gone, Danielle. He passed before they got there. Danielle sat down on the bottom stair. She didn't remember walking to it. She doesn't remember much of the next 20 minutes. Pat talked, she answered, words like arrangements and Charlotte and day after tomorrow moved through the air without fully landing. When she hung up, Trevor was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, dish towel still on his shoulder, watching her. "What happened?" she told him. Her voice was steady in the way that meant nothing was steady underneath. Trevor crossed the room and put both arms around her. He was warm. He smelled like the garlic from dinner. She let herself press her face against his shoulder for a moment. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, we're going to handle this. Let me look up flights." He moved with purpose after that. He found her a 6 a.m. to Charlotte, booked it before she could think about the price, and sat with her while she called her cousin Marcus to say she was coming. He brought her tea she didn't ask for and a blanket she didn't need, but accepted anyway. Around 10 o'clock, he stood and stretched. "You should sleep. I'll set everything out for the morning." He paused in the doorway. "Where do you keep your passport? The Home Office lockbox?" She nodded without looking up. "Top shelf, the blue folder." "I'll have it ready," he said. "Don't worry about a thing." She set her alarm for 4:15. She turned off the lamp. She closed her eyes in the dark and thought about her father's laugh and the text she'd sent him just hours ago, full of good news he would never answer. She was asleep before she heard Trevor come to bed. The alarm went off at 4:15, and Danielle was already awake. She'd been lying in the dark for an hour, maybe more, listening to Trevor breathe beside her. Her mind kept pulling at the same loose thread, the sound of Pat's voice, the word past, the fact that her father's phone would ring now and no one would answer it. She got up quietly, washed her face, pulled on the clothes she'd laid out the night before. The house was completely still, the kind of still that only happens before the world remembers to start. Her bag was mostly packed. She moved through the bedroom on muscle memory, adding her phone charger, her toothbrush, the earrings she always wore for important things. Her hands moved fast, but her chest was heavy. There was a eulogy folded in her carry-on bag, 2 handwritten pages she'd typed up just after midnight, sitting at the kitchen table with cold tea and blurred vision. Her father had asked her to speak at his funeral. Not recently. He'd asked her 2 years ago, the summer he had that health scare with his heart, said she was the one who had the words. She had told him he was being dramatic. He had just smiled. She grabbed the carry-on and brought it to the front door. Then she turned back toward the bedroom. "Trevor," she touched his shoulder. He stirred, blinking. "What time is it?" 4:30. "Where did you put my passport? You said you'd have it ready." He rubbed his face and sat up slowly. I left it out for you. Should be on the kitchen counter." She had already checked the kitchen counter. "It's not there. Check the table by the door." She checked. Nothing. He came downstairs in his t-shirt and sweatpants, squinting, and they looked together. Kitchen counter, side table, the bench by the door, the little ceramic bowl where they dropped keys and receipts, the dining room table, buried under mail she'd been meaning to sort. Nothing. "Did you check the lockbox?" he asked. "That's where it lives. I assumed you took it out." "I might have left it in the lockbox." He said it like that was a reasonable thing, like he hadn't told her the night before that he'd handle it. She went to her home office, pulled the lockbox from the shelf, and entered the combination with fingers that weren't quite steady. Inside, insurance documents, the deed to her car, their marriage certificate. The blue folder was there. The passport was not. She stood very still for 1 second. Then she went back out and told Trevor. He frowned, the kind of frown that looked like concern. "Are you sure you didn't move it? You were pretty out of it last night." There it was, that particular sentence, the one that showed up every time something went sideways. "Are you sure? You were stressed. You always do this when you're overwhelmed." Said gently, always gently, in the tone of a man simply trying to help. "I didn't move it, Trevor." Okay. Let's just keep looking." They looked for 40 minutes. Every drawer in the kitchen, every surface in the office, the nightstands, the bathroom cabinet where she sometimes dropped things without thinking. Trevor moved through the house with a kind of steady helpfulness that, in another moment, she might have been grateful for. By 5:30, it was over. She stood in the middle of the living room with her coat on and her bag by the door, and the understanding sitting flat in her chest that she was not going to make that flight, that she was not going to be in Charlotte this morning, that she was not going to see her father's face before they put him in the ground. Trevor suggested driving to the passport agency anyway, some emergency window he'd read about online. She let him drive her. She sat in the passenger seat and watched the dark streets go pale with early light and didn't say anything. The agency wasn't open for emergency appointments until later in the morning. By then, it was already too late. The flight was gone. The funeral was at 2 o'clock. Her cousin Marcus called and held his phone up at the front of the church, and that was how Danielle attended her father's service, through a 4-inch screen. Through a connection that froze twice, the audio cutting in and out so that the pastor's words came to her in broken pieces. She sat on the floor of her bedroom with her back against the bed and watched strangers, some of them family she hadn't seen in years, file past a casket she could not touch. Her cousin Yvette delivered the eulogy. She did it well. She was not who Charles Odom had asked. Danielle kept her hand pressed flat against her mouth the whole time. Afterward, Marcus turned the camera around so she could see the family gathered outside the church. She could see her Aunt Pat standing with her hands clasped, composed the way Pat always was in public. And she could see, in the careful way people shifted around her absence, that questions were being asked. Her cousin Deb leaned toward someone and said something she couldn't hear. A man she recognized as her father's neighbor looked at the phone screen with an expression that wasn't quite sympathy. It was something more like concern. That night, Trevor brought her soup she didn't eat and sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm still going to look," he said. "It'll turn up. These things always do." She nodded. She didn't trust her voice. "Try to sleep," he said. He turned the lamp off. The door clicked softly behind him. Danielle lay in the dark. Her eyes were open. The eulogy she hadn't delivered was still in her carry-on bag by the front door, folded twice, her father's name written across the top in her own handwriting. She lay there and breathed, and breathed, and did not sleep. The days after the funeral blurred together. Danielle went back to work on Wednesday because staying home meant staying inside her own head, and the inside of her own head had become a bad place to be. She answered emails, she ran her morning check-ins, she moved through her routines the way a person moves through water, slower than normal, aware of the resistance, not sure what was on the other side. She ate when she remembered, she slept when she couldn't stay upright. Trevor was attentive in a way that felt like weather, present, filling up the space, not requiring much from her. He brought her coffee. He asked how she was doing in that careful voice people use when they don't actually want a detailed answer. She said fine every time. He seemed satisfied with that. On Saturday morning, she decided to do laundry. It was the most ordinary thing she could think of, something with steps, something that ended with a clean result. She stripped the bed, gathered towels, moved through the bedroom, pulling things from the hamper. Then she went to the hall closet for Trevor's gym bag, the black one with the broken zipper pull on the main compartment, the one he dropped there every time he came back from the gym and never fully unpacked. It was heavy, still. She set it on the laundry room floor and started pulling things out. A damp towel, his old gray sweatshirt, a pair of shorts still inside out, his deodorant rolling loose at the bottom. She reached for the side pocket, the small one with the intact zipper, the one he always handled himself, always said he'd get to later. She unzipped it. Her fingers found something flat and stiff before her eyes did. A small book. Hardcover, navy blue. She pulled it out. Her own face looked up at her from the photo page. For a moment she just held it. Her passport. Right there in her hands, in the pocket of her husband's gym bag, warm from being tucked against the dark fabric for how many days? She turned it over once. It was her name, her photo, every stamp she'd collected from years of work trips and the one vacation they'd taken to Mexico 3 years ago. She set it on top of the dryer. Her hand went back into the pocket. There was something else. Paper, folded into thirds, the kind of crispness that meant it had been printed and folded carefully, not crumpled in a rush. She opened it. A flight itinerary. Trevor's name at the top. Departure, Friday evening. Destination, Miami, Florida. Return, Sunday. The same Friday her father was buried. The same weekend she'd spent watching a funeral through a phone screen on the floor of their bedroom. She read it twice. Her eyes moved over each line slowly, like she was reading something in a language she mostly knew. She folded it back, set it next to the passport. Her hand went in one more time. A receipt. Small, white, the kind a locksmith prints from a portable machine. Dated 11 days ago. 2 days before Pat's phone call. 2 days before her father collapsed. A duplicate key, the receipt said, for a residential lockbox. She stood in the laundry room for a long time. The washer was running. The sound of water filling the drum was very loud in the small space. She looked at the 3 items laid out on the dryer, the passport, the itinerary, the receipt. And she thought about her father's neighbor's face on that phone screen, the way her cousin Deb had leaned over and whispered something, the questions that had moved through her family's faces like a slow current. She put all 3 items in the pocket of her cardigan. Then she finished the laundry. Trevor came home at 6 with takeout bags and his easy smile. He set the food on the counter and found her in the kitchen, already setting out plates. "Hey," he said. "How was your day?" "Quiet," she said. "Good." He opened the containers, named each dish, handed her the one she always got. They sat down. He talked about his drive home, about traffic on the bridge, about something a coworker had said that was mildly funny. Then, somewhere between the first and second bite, he looked up and said, "Hey, did you ever find your passport? I've been meaning to ask." His voice was easy. His face was open. His eyes held just the right amount of lingering concern, the look of a man who had almost forgotten, but not quite, because he cared. "Not yet," she said. "It'll turn up." He shook his head slightly, like it was a small frustration they shared. "These things always do." She speared a piece of food with her fork. "You're probably right." That was all. He moved on. She let him. That night, after he fell asleep, she lay on her side of the bed and stared at the ceiling. The passport, the itinerary, and the locksmith receipt were inside her work tote, zipped into the interior pocket where she kept things she needed to keep safe. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She thought about what she knew. She thought about what she didn't know yet. She thought about those 2 things being very different from each other, and about which one she needed more of before she said a single word. She was going to find out exactly what she was dealing with. On her terms, not his. Sunday morning came in gray and quiet. Danielle sat at the small desk in her home office with a mug of coffee going cold beside her keyboard. She had her father's financial papers spread out in front of her. The folder Aunt Pat had mailed overnight, stuffed with insurance statements, a bank account summary, and a handwritten list of monthly bills in her father's careful block print. Looking at his handwriting hurt in a way she hadn't expected. She pressed her fingers flat against the papers and breathed through it. Trevor was still asleep. She could hear the ceiling fan running in their bedroom down the hall, the low hum of it, steady as a pulse. She had maybe an hour. She picked up her phone and called Reggie Vance. He answered on the second ring, which was classic Reggie. He always picked up like he'd been expecting you. "Danielle." His voice was warm and unhurried. "I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," she said. It was the most honest version of fine she had. "Day by day." "That's all you can do." A pause, and then, "What do you need?" That was the thing about Reggie. He never made you circle around to it. He just opened the door and waited. "My dad's estate," she said. "It's small, Just a checking account, a life insurance policy, and I think a property situation Pat mentioned. Nothing complicated, but I don't want to miss anything. Would you have time to look at it with me? Of course. Send me whatever you have. I will. She ran her thumb along the edge of her father's folder. There's one more thing. Yeah? I want to get a better picture of where Trevor and I stand, financially. Just a full picture. I've been meaning to do it for a while, and I keep putting it off. She kept her voice relaxed, the way you sound when something is already on your to-do list. Would you mind running an eye over the joint accounts too? Make sure everything looks like it should? A brief quiet. Reggie was a careful man. He didn't fill silence with noise. Sure, he said. I can do that. Get me your account numbers and read access when you can. I'll send everything today. They talked a few more minutes about her father, about the drive to Charlotte, about Pat. Then she heard the bedroom fan cut off down the hall, and she wrapped up the call, set her phone face down, and started getting ready for the rest of the day. Reggie called her back on Thursday afternoon. She was in her car in the parking garage at work, engine off, windows up. She had parked there on purpose, stepped away from her desk, and come down 3 floors so she could take the call without walls that carried sound. Danielle. His tone was different from Sunday, still steady, but with a new weight behind it. I need to walk you through some things. Okay. The estate stuff is straightforward. I'll send you a summary tonight. He paused. But the joint accounts, there's a pattern here I want you to understand. Her hand tightened on the phone. Tell me, she said. Going back about 26 months, there are recurring transfers out, small enough not to trip anything automatically, between $800 and $1,200, spaced out so they don't land in the same week twice. They go to an LLC. She heard him pull up something on his end, called MSH Consulting Group. I ran it. It's a single-member LLC registered in Florida. The registered agent's name is S. Marsh, Miami address. The parking garage hummed around her. Somewhere above her, a car was pulling out, the sound of tires on concrete. Miami. How much total? She asked. Best estimate right now? Somewhere north of $30,000. Could be more once I go back further. $30,000, moved in careful, quiet increments across more than 2 years. Not a mistake, not a glitch. A system. Reggie, she kept her voice level, I need you to keep digging, as far back as you can go, and I need you to document everything, every transfer, every date, every amount, in writing, something I can hold in my hand. I know what you need. His voice was matter-of-fact, not alarmed, not dramatic, just clear. You got it. I'll be thorough. Don't say anything to anyone. You know me better than that. She did. She sat in the car for a moment after she hung up, eyes forward, watching the concrete column in front of her windshield. She thought about the itinerary folded in her work tote. She thought about the dates. She thought about the months and months of small, careful transfers while she sat across the dinner table from a man who said, "These things always turn up," with a face as calm as still water. This was not a one-time trip. This was a life, built in parallel to hers, funded by money that was half hers, running quietly underneath everything she thought she knew. She went back upstairs. That evening, she opened a new document on her personal laptop, the one Trevor had no access to, the old one she kept in her office desk. She titled it simply, Notes, and she began to write down everything Trevor had said and done in the past 2 weeks, starting with the night her father died. Every word, every look, every small, practiced lie. The drive to Charlotte took 4 hours. Danielle made it alone, on a Saturday, with the windows cracked and the radio off. She needed the quiet. She needed to think. Pat lived in the same house she'd lived in for 30 years, a brick ranch on Caldwell Street with a deep front porch and window boxes that still had her late husband's marigolds in them, even now, years after he was gone. Some people held on to things. Pat was one of those people. Danielle pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment. She hadn't been here since the summer. She and her father had come together then, eaten Pat's smothered chicken, sat on that porch until the lightning bugs came out. Her father had laughed so hard at something Danielle said that he'd knocked his sweet tea over and laughed even harder at that. She got out of the car before the memory could finish. Pat opened the door before she reached the steps. She was a small woman, compact and upright, with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that didn't miss much. She pulled Danielle in by both hands and held her there for a moment. Not a long hug, just a firm one, the kind that says, "I see you," without making a production of it. "You ate?" Pat asked, stepping back to look at her. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." They went inside. The house smelled like coffee and pine sol and something baking low in the oven. The living room had her father's face in 3 different photos on the wall. Young, then middle-aged, then older, his smile the same in all 3. Danielle looked at them while Pat moved into the kitchen, and she kept her face still and her breathing even. She sat down at the kitchen table. Pat set a plate of cornbread in front of her without asking. They spent the first hour going through the straightforward things, the checking account balance, the utility bills still coming in, the modest life insurance policy from his job, which Danielle already knew about. Pat had a manila folder, organized and tabbed, and she walked through each item with the same clear, patient energy she brought to everything. Then she closed that folder and set a second one on the table. It was thicker. "There's more," Pat said. She sat down across from Danielle and folded her hands. "Your daddy asked me to hold this separately. Didn't want it mixed in with the regular papers." Danielle looked at the folder. "What is it?" "A trust." Pat said the word plainly. "He set it up about 18 months ago. He used an attorney, not the same one who did his regular will. Different one. Downtown." She slid the folder across the table. Danielle opened it slowly. Inside was a trust document, clean and formal, with her name printed on the first page as the sole beneficiary. Attached behind it was a property deed, a half-acre lot in Mecklenburg County, paid off, valued at just over $90,000. And behind that, a second life insurance policy, a private one, separate from his employer plan. She had known nothing about any of it. "He didn't tell you?" Pat asked. "No." Danielle turned a page. "He never said a word." Pat was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He didn't want it getting back to Trevor." The kitchen was very still. Danielle set the document down and looked at her aunt. "Your daddy didn't trust that man," Pat said, not unkindly, just directly, the way she always said hard things. "He never did, not from the beginning, but he watched for a long time before he said anything." She paused. "He said something twice." "When?" "First time was about 3 years ago. You had that thing with your promotion, where Trevor made some comment at Easter dinner, right in front of everybody, about how you worked too much. Your daddy called you after. You remember that call?" She did. She remembered saying Trevor was just joking, that he was proud of her really, that Pat and her father worried too much. "You shut it down," Pat said. "Not mean about it. You were just... you defended him. And your daddy let it go." Danielle pressed her lips together. "Second time was maybe a 1.5 years later. He wouldn't tell me the specifics, just said he'd seen something that bothered him. He called you again." Pat looked at her steadily. "You told him Trevor had been under a lot of stress at work." Danielle closed her eyes for just a second. She had said exactly that. She could hear her own voice saying it. "He's been under a lot of stress, Daddy. He doesn't mean anything by it." "After that second call," Pat said, "he didn't bring it up again with you. But he went and saw that attorney within the month. He was going to make sure that whatever happened, Trevor couldn't touch what he left you. She reached across the table and tapped the folder. Your daddy couldn't make you see it, but he could protect you from it. Danielle looked down at her father's name on the trust document, his signature, careful and deliberate at the bottom of the page, the same man who wrote his monthly bills in neat block print. He had seen it. He had tried. And when she hadn't listened, he had quietly done the only thing left he could do. She left Pat's house an hour later with the folder tucked under her arm and a foil-wrapped plate of cornbread Pat pressed on her at the door. She put both on the passenger seat. She backed out of the driveway and turned toward the highway and drove. The folder sat next to her the whole 4 hours home, and by the time Charlotte disappeared behind her and the highway opened up flat and long ahead, the grief inside her chest had shifted into something else. Something that didn't ache the same way. Something with edges. The dinner was Simone's idea. She had called Trevor the week before, said she wanted to bring everyone together, said the family needed it after everything that had happened. Trevor had mentioned it to Danielle with the easy confidence of a man who didn't expect to be told no. Simone's doing Sunday dinner. You in? Danielle had said yes. She had smiled when she said it. Simone lived in a townhouse in Concord, about 40 minutes from their place. She was a good cook, better than she gave herself credit for, and she went all out on Sundays when she had people over. Roast chicken, macaroni and cheese from scratch, green beans with ham hock, the kind of meal that made a house smell like comfort before you even got through the door. Trevor's cousin Marcus was there, and Marcus's girlfriend, and an older couple from Simone's church who Danielle had met once before. The table was full and warm and loud, in the easy way that big meals tend to be. Danielle played her part. She laughed at Marcus's stories. She complimented the macaroni, genuinely, because it was good. She passed dishes and refilled her water glass and sat close enough to Trevor that no one would have looked twice at them. Trevor was relaxed. That was the word for it. The particular relaxed of a man who believed he was safe. About an hour in, Simone got up to check on the dessert, and Danielle followed her into the kitchen to help carry things out. It was a small kitchen, cheerful, with yellow curtains and a ceramic rooster on the counter that had been there since their mother gave it to her. "Sit," Simone said, waving at the little stool near the island. "I just need to pull the cobbler and let it cool." Danielle sat. Simone pulled on an oven mitt and crouched down to check the oven window. "This has been a rough few weeks for y'all," she said, not looking up. "I'm glad you came tonight. I wanted to do something after your dad." "It means a lot," Danielle said. Simone straightened, set the cobbler dish on the stovetop, and pulled off the mitt. She turned around with the particular look of someone about to say something meant to be comforting. "I'll just say, I'm really glad things have settled down for Trevor, too." She exhaled. "That whole Miami situation had me stressed for a while, but it seems like it worked out, so—" She reached for a serving spoon. Danielle didn't move. She kept her face very still, not stiff, just still, the way a pond goes still right before something surfaces. "The Miami thing," Danielle said, gently, like she was just following the thread. Simone looked up, and in the half-second before she caught herself, Danielle saw it, the flicker of recognition, the small internal, "Oh no." "I just mean," Simone started, "he mentioned he had some stuff going on down there. Work stuff." Simone. One word. Quiet. Danielle didn't press hard. She didn't need to. She just let the silence hold the question for her. Simone set the spoon down. She looked at the counter. She was 29 years old and not built for lying. Her face gave her away completely, cycling through 3 emotions in the span of 5 seconds. I don't want to be in the middle of anything, she said finally. You're already in it, Danielle said, still gently. You just don't have to stay there alone. Simone looked at her. Then she looked toward the doorway to the dining room, where the sound of Marcus telling another story drifted through. Laughter, the clink of glasses. She lowered her voice. He told me about her maybe 6 months ago. A woman down there. He didn't say it was serious. He said it was complicated, that things between you two had been distant. Her jaw tightened slightly, like the words tasted off even as she said them. I didn't think it was my place. I figured it was between the two of you. But you knew, Danielle said. I knew. Simone met her eyes, and her own were unhappy and a little ashamed. I'm sorry, Danielle. Danielle nodded once. She let the moment breathe. She didn't reach for Simone's arm or tell her it was fine, because it wasn't fine, and Simone deserved to feel the weight of that at least a little. Then she stood up, picked up the stack of dessert plates from the counter and said, Cobbler smells good. Let's bring it out before Marcus eats the rest of the macaroni. Simone blinked, looked at her, nodded slowly. They carried everything out together. Danielle sat at that table for another hour and 15 minutes. She listened to the conversation move around her like water. She laughed twice more. She watched Trevor reach over and top off her sweet tea without being asked. That easy, practiced gesture of a man performing a good marriage for an audience. She looked at him once, directly, for just a moment. He smiled at her, comfortable, certain. She smiled back. In the car on the way home, Trevor talked about Marcus the whole drive, something about a truck he was thinking about buying, some debate about whether it was practical. Danielle made sounds of agreement at the right intervals. When they pulled into the garage, she said, I'm exhausted. I need to just go straight to sleep tonight. Of course, Trevor said, already reaching for his phone. You've had a long week. She went inside and closed the bedroom door quietly behind her. Reggie worked out of a shared office space in Midtown, the kind of place with exposed brick and too many plants and people who never seemed to be on the phone but were always typing. He had reserved a small conference room for them, the corner one with a door that actually closed. He was already there when Danielle arrived. Laptop open, a legal pad covered in his neat, small handwriting sitting next to a stack of printed pages held together with a binder clip. You want coffee? He asked. I'm good. Sit down then. He said it the way he'd always said things, direct, no cushion, like a man who respected her enough not to pad the delivery. Because there's a lot. He walked her through it, page by page. The first transfer had happened 2 years and 8 months ago. Just under $400, moved from their joint savings into an LLC called Marsh Ventures Group, a name that meant nothing until you knew to look for it. Small enough to read like an auto payment, Reggie said. Bill, subscription, whatever. You'd scroll right past it. Then it happened again. Same amount, different date. Then a slightly larger one. Then 2 in the same month. He varied the amounts, Reggie said, tapping the page. That's deliberate. Keeps it from flagging as a pattern in your bank's automated systems. Keeps it from feeling like a pattern to someone scanning the statement. Danielle looked at the column of numbers. She didn't need him to do the math. She could already see it. What's the total? Reggie looked at her steadily. Over 2 years, roughly $63,000. She didn't react. She had made herself ready for a big number. She still felt it land in her chest like something dropped from a height, but she kept her hands flat on the table and her face composed. The timing, she said. Walk me through the timing. Reggie nodded. He flipped to the next section of his printout. The transfers had increased in frequency over the last 14 months, right around the time her father's health had started to slip. The first hospitalization, the reduced hours at work, the phone calls that came more often and lasted longer. He used that window, Reggie said. He didn't say it with heat. He said it the way he said everything, factually, like a man reading a map, but his jaw was tight. When you were distracted, when you were emotionally stretched, he moved more money in those 14 months than in the year before combined. Danielle looked at the dates. She thought about all the evenings she'd spent on the phone with her father, stretched across the couch, talking about nothing and everything. his old stories, the house he'd grown up in, what he wanted for her. She thought about Trevor, sitting across the room from her on those nights, scrolling his phone. Patient. Quiet. She had thought he was giving her space. "There's one more thing," Reggie said. He reached into a manila folder and slid a still image across the table. It was grainy but legible, a still frame from what looked like a home security camera. The timestamp in the corner read 2 nights before her father's death. The image showed their hallway, the door to her home office standing open. And Trevor, clearly Trevor, crouched in front of the fireproof lockbox on the shelf beneath her desk, holding what was unmistakably her passport in his hand. The lockbox was open. Danielle stared at the image for a long moment. The edges of it seemed to hum. "The camera was on the router shelf," Reggie said quietly. "The one you set up for the package deliveries and forgot about." She had forgotten about it. Completely. "I have the full clip," he said. 37 seconds. Clear enough to use." Danielle set the image down. She squared it with the edge of the table the way she straightened everything, a small, automatic motion. "I need copies of all of this," she said. "Already printed 2 sets." She called Yolanda that same evening. They met at Yolanda's apartment, the one with the 2 small kitchen and the big sectional sofa she'd owned since 2019 and refused to replace. Danielle sat with her knees tucked up and spread everything out on the coffee table. Reggie's documents, the itinerary, the locksmith receipt, the security still. Yolanda was quiet for longer than usual. Then she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Over the next 2 weeks, they moved carefully and in the right order. Yolanda connected Danielle with an attorney named Carol Sims, a divorce lawyer who had the energy of someone who had heard every version of this story and was no longer surprised by any of it. Carol reviewed everything in a single 2-hour meeting and told Danielle exactly what she was entitled to and exactly what needed to happen first. Danielle's personal savings came out of the joint account in increments, repositioned into an individual account Trevor had no access to. Her father's life insurance payout and the property trust Pat had handed her went through Carol's office directly, shielded before Trevor could think to reach for them. The documentation was organized into a single binder: the LLC records, the transfer timeline, the itinerary, the locksmith receipt, Reggie's full written analysis, and the security footage, saved to 2 separate drives, one of which lived in Carol's office. Danielle kept the original passport. Through all of it, she came home every evening. She made dinner twice that week. She asked Trevor about his day and listened to him answer and laughed when something called for laughing. Trevor went to Miami one more time, a Thursday to Sunday trip, casual announcement on a Tuesday. "Business," he said. "Of course," she said. "I'll be fine." She watched him pack his bag. She kept her expression easy and open. She handed him the phone charger he was about to forget off the nightstand. He kissed her cheek on his way out the door. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn for years. She stood at the window and watched his car back down the driveway. The Sunday he came back, she had dinner waiting. His favorites. Real effort, the kind that takes most of an afternoon. The table was set nicely. Candles, the good placemats. He walked in and stopped in the doorway to the dining room, taking it in. Something in his face relaxed in a way that told her he had been expecting something else entirely, some undercurrent of tension he'd been quietly bracing for. Instead, he found this. "What's all this?" he asked. "I've been thinking," Danielle said from the kitchen. Her voice was warm, unhurried. "We've had a hard season, both of us. I just thought, maybe we need a real reset. Together." Trevor set his bag down. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that reached his eyes, because he believed it. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'd like that." "Good," she said. "Let's do dinner, properly, next Friday. Just us." "I'll be here," he said. He had no idea who else would be. Trevor's headlights swept across the front window at 6:47. Danielle heard his car in the driveway. She didn't move from her seat at the head of the table. She just set down her water glass and folded her hands in front of her and waited. The table was full. Pat sat to her left, straight-backed, both hands wrapped around a glass of sweet tea, her reading glasses pushed up on her head. Reggie sat beside her, the binder closed in front of him, a legal pad off to the side. Yolanda was across from them, legs crossed, wearing that look she got when she was done being polite about something. And Simone, Trevor's own sister, sat at the far end, near the window, not quite able to look at the door. The front door opened. Trevor came in carrying a bottle of wine. He'd dressed up a little. Dark slacks, the navy shirt Danielle had bought him 2 birthdays ago. He was smiling before he even cleared the entryway, the easy, confident smile of a man who had convinced himself the worst was behind him. Then he stepped into the dining room. The smile didn't fall. It froze. His eyes moved around the table. Pat, Reggie, Yolanda, Simone, and something behind his face flickered and went very still. "What's going on?" He kept his voice light, just barely. "Come sit down, Trevor," Danielle said. He didn't move right away. His eyes landed on Simone, who looked at the tablecloth. Then he sat. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had organized everything the same way she organized every major logistics project at work, by sequence, by dependency, by what proved what. She started with the money. Reggie opened the binder and slid the transfer timeline across the table, column by column, date, amount, destination. Marsh Ventures Group, LLC, 2 years and 8 months of it. $63,000, Danielle said, give or take. Trevor looked at the page. Then he looked at her. "That account is a business investment. I was going to tell you about it when..." "When?" Reggie said. Just the one word. Trevor's jaw moved. He didn't finish the sentence. Danielle moved to the next page, the LLC registration. S. Marsh, Miami. The timeline of deposits cross-referenced against Trevor's business trips, each one documented, each one dated. Then Yolanda set the photograph on the table, printed clean and clear, a woman walking into a restaurant in Miami, arm through Trevor's, dated 4 months ago. Trevor looked at it for a long moment. "That's not what it looks like." His voice had changed, still smooth but thinner now. "I've been going through something, a lot of pressure. You've been checked out for months, Danielle. You know that. Emotionally unavailable. I've been struggling." "Simone," Danielle said. Simone looked up. Her eyes were red at the edges. "Tell him what you told me," Danielle said, gently, not a threat, just a direction. Simone pressed her lips together. She looked at her brother, really looked at him, and said quietly, "I knew about Miami. I'd known for months. He told me it made him feel like himself again." She swallowed. "I should have said something. I didn't. I'm sorry, Danielle." Trevor's chair scraped back slightly. "Simone, you don't know the whole situation." "She knew enough," Yolanda said. Danielle let the room settle. Then she reached for the last item. She placed the security still on the table in front of him. The hallway, the open office door, the lockbox. Trevor, crouched and clear in the frame, her passport in his hand. The timestamp unmistakable in the corner. Then the locksmith receipt, dated 2 days before her father died. The table was quiet. Trevor stared at the image. Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite name. Not guilt. Not yet. Something more like the look of a man who had just heard a door lock from the outside. "That's..." He stopped. Started again. "I was trying to protect you. You were already a mess about your father, and I didn't think traveling alone was..." "Say that again," Pat said. Her voice was soft. That was the most dangerous thing about Pat, how quiet she got when she was furious. Trevor didn't say it again. Danielle looked at her husband. She looked at him the way she had been practicing looking at him for weeks. Clear, unhurried, without the old reflex to soften or retreat. "You told me for years that I was too much," she said. "Too focused on work, too close to my family, too intense, too demanding." She paused. "You spent years making me believe that shrinking myself was the same as growing up." She glanced at the binder, then back at him. "But that wasn't about me. That was about making sure I never stood still long enough to look at what you were doing." Trevor opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," she said. He closed it. "You didn't hide my passport because you were worried about me," she said. "You hid it because you needed me alone and off balance while you were in Miami. You needed me too broken to ask questions, and you used my father's death to do it." She let that land. Then she reached into the folder beside her plate and set 3 more documents on the table. "The divorce filing was submitted on Wednesday," she said. "My accounts are protected, and S. Marsh has already been contacted about the LLC, including which marital assets funded it." Trevor's suspension came on a Tuesday. Danielle knew because Reggie texted her at 10:14 in the morning. 4 words. "Bank opened an inquiry." She was at her desk when she read it. She set her phone face down, finished the email she was drafting, and then sat for a moment with her hands flat on her keyboard. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired in a way she didn't have a word for yet. The inquiry had started quietly, the way those things always do. A compliance officer, a flag on an internal transfer pattern, a request for documentation that Trevor couldn't produce cleanly. Reggie had sent his findings to Danielle's attorney, who had forwarded them to the bank's fraud unit as part of the divorce proceedings. Not as an attack, just as a matter of record. The numbers spoke for themselves. They always had. Trevor had used his position as a regional sales director to route transfers in ways that blurred the line between personal and institutional access. Small enough to dodge automated alerts. Consistent enough to leave a pattern once someone was looking. And now, someone was looking. He was placed on administrative leave by Wednesday afternoon. Danielle heard about it through Yolanda, who had heard it from the attorney. She did not call Trevor. She did not text him. There was nothing left between them that required her voice. By the following week, the leave had become a termination. Yolanda called with the news while Danielle was at the grocery store, standing in the produce section with a bunch of bananas in her hand. "They let him go," Yolanda said. "Effective immediately. No severance." Danielle set the bananas in her cart. "Okay," she said. "You doing all right?" "Yeah," she said. "I'm okay." And she was. That was the strange part. She was genuinely okay. The Miami situation had already unraveled by then. From what Simone had quietly relayed, still communicating with Danielle in brief, careful messages like someone walking across ice, S. Marsh had not taken the news well. That was an understatement. The woman had believed the LLC was a legitimate business investment. She had believed Trevor was separated. She had believed a lot of things that turned out to be architectures he had built specifically for her benefit, the same way he had built different ones for Danielle. When the divorce attorney's letter arrived, copied to S. Marsh as Danielle had promised at the dinner, it had included a detailed accounting of exactly which marital funds had flowed into Marsh Ventures Group. It had laid out, plainly and without editorializing, that the LLC bore her name, but the money inside it did not belong to either of them. S. Marsh had called Trevor the same day the letter arrived. Whatever was said in that conversation, they had not spoken since. Trevor's family pulled back slowly, the way the tide goes out. Not all at once, but steadily, until you look up and realize the water is gone. His parents were quiet people who valued appearances above almost everything else. The investigation at the bank was the thing that finally broke through their careful neutrality. His mother stopped returning his calls promptly. His father told him, in the flat, disappointed tone of a man who had been embarrassed one time too many, that Trevor needed to handle his own affairs for a while. Simone was the one who surprised Danielle most. She had expected Trevor's sister to drift back to him eventually. Family loyalty was a powerful current, and Simone had always moved with it. But instead, about 2 weeks after the dinner, Simone had knocked on Danielle's front door on a Sunday afternoon holding a plastic container of sweet potato pie and a look on her face like someone who had been rehearsing a conversation for days. "I can't fix what I didn't do," Simone said, standing on the porch. "But I wanted you to know I'm not pretending anymore." Danielle had taken the pie. She had let her in. They had sat at the kitchen table and talked for 2 hours, honestly, about things that had been left too long in the corners. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not yet, but it was something real, and Danielle had learned to value real things. The divorce settlement was finalized on a Thursday morning. The house went to Danielle. It was in her name, purchased largely through her income, and the mortgage history reflected that clearly. Trevor's attorney had made noise early on about contested assets, but there was nothing to contest. Danielle's inheritance from her father sat securely in the trust Pat had helped her finalize. The savings she had moved through Yolanda's guidance were equally protected. What was hers was documented. What was his was not. He signed on a Thursday. Danielle was told he did it without much argument by the end. Just a man sitting at a table, looking at papers, with nowhere left to push. By the end of the month, he was living in a rented condo on the east side of the city. 1 bedroom, a parking lot view. Danielle drove past it once by accident. She had taken a wrong turn leaving a client meeting. She saw the building. Beige brick. A row of identical windows. She did not slow down. She didn't feel glad about any of it. That was the thing people didn't understand about truth coming out. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like the long exhale after years of holding your breath, like finally being allowed to stand up straight. She drove home. The house was quiet and hers. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, one hand on the counter, and let herself just be still. That was enough. The ribbon was yellow. Danielle had picked the color herself, her father's favorite. He used to wear a yellow tie to every graduation, every recital, every moment he considered worth dressing up for. He said it was the color of something starting. She stood in front of the Hargrove Community Center on a Saturday morning in October, one hand holding one end of the ribbon, Pat holding the other. The air smelled like cut grass and someone's good perfume. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, maybe 40 people, maybe a few more. Faculty from the local community college, a city councilwoman, 8 students who had been named the first recipients of the James Hargrove Foster Scholarship for first-generation college students. Danielle looked at those 8 faces and felt something open up in her chest. They were young, nervous in the good way, shoulders up, eyes bright, dressed carefully in clothes that looked like they'd been ironed that morning. One girl in the front row was gripping a folded paper program with both hands, like it might fly away. Danielle knew that feeling. She had been that girl once. Yolanda was standing just off to the left, wearing a burnt orange wrap dress and heels that were completely impractical for standing on grass, which she had complained about twice already and would complain about again before the morning was over. "Your father would have cried by now," she said quietly, appearing at Danielle's elbow while the councilwoman finished her remarks. "He would have cried during the setup," Danielle said. Yolanda laughed, low and warm. "True." Reggie was a few feet behind them, hands in his jacket pockets, doing that thing he always did when he was moved by something, going very still and looking slightly off to the side, like he didn't want anyone to catch him feeling it. He had driven 3 hours from Atlanta for this. He had not mentioned it being an inconvenience, because it wasn't one to him. Simone stood near the back of the small crowd, a little apart, the way she still sometimes placed herself, like she wasn't sure how much space she was allowed to take up. They were still building their way back to easy. It was slow work, honest work, and Danielle had decided honest work was the only kind worth doing. When their eyes met across the crowd, Simone gave a small nod, and Danielle gave one back. That was enough. It was real, and that was what mattered. Pat spoke into the microphone first. She was 61 years old and had the voice of someone who had spent decades refusing to be talked over. She talked about her brother, about the way he drove 4 hours each way to move Danielle into her college dormitory, about how he kept every one of her report cards in a shoebox under his bed, about how he had spent the last years of his life making sure what he had built couldn't be taken from her. He knew what this girl was worth, Pat said, looking straight at Danielle, even when she forgot. Danielle pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry before the ribbon cut. She had made herself that promise. She made it by about 15 seconds. When it was Danielle's turn at the microphone, she kept it short. She talked about her father's belief that a good education was the only thing no one could ever repossess. She talked about what it had meant to be the first in her family to finish college, the sheer weight of it, the pride of it, the loneliness of it sometimes. She looked at the 8 students in the front row. "You're not alone in this," she said. "That's what this is for, so you know someone already believes you belong there." Applause moved through the crowd like a wave. Danielle and Pat lifted the scissors together. The ribbon fell in 2 yellow pieces. Afterward, there was food. Pat had organized a full spread with the kind of logistical authority usually reserved for military operations, and the crowd spread across the community center's side lawn in clusters, talking and laughing, plates balanced on palms. Danielle was standing with one of the scholarship students, a girl named Brianna who was going into nursing, when she felt her phone buzz in the pocket of her blazer. She didn't check it right away. She finished the conversation. She learned that Brianna's mother had worked as a home health aide for 20 years, that Brianna wanted to become a pediatric nurse, that she had 3 younger siblings who were watching everything she did. "They're watching you back," Danielle told her. "Let them." After Brianna moved toward the food table, Danielle slipped her phone out and looked at the screen. A text. From Trevor. "Hey, I know I have no right to reach out. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I was wondering if maybe we could talk sometime, if you're open to it." She read it once. She read it again. Then she turned the phone over in her hand and set it face down on the table beside her. Gently, no drama, the way you set down something that no longer has any weight. She turned back toward the lawn. Pat was laughing at something Yolanda had said, one hand on her hip, head thrown back. Reggie was crouched down talking to one of the students, patient and focused, like the kid was the most important person in the room. Simone was helping stack empty plates, quiet and useful, earning her way back in the only language that meant anything. The yellow ribbon was still on the ground near the entrance, a piece of it lifted slightly in the breeze. Danielle walked back toward her people. Steady. Whole. Fully seen. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!